At 79, Eric Stewart, one of the quiet geniuses behind 10cc, has finally broken decades of silence. For nearly 50 years, fans have wondered what really happened to one of rock's most inventive bands. Why did a group that created timeless hits like I'm Not in Love and The Things We Do for Love suddenly collapse when they were on top of the world? For years, every member had their version, except Eric. But now, he's setting the record straight. And what he's revealed isn't just a story about music. It's about betrayal, loss, and the price of artistic pride.
Before the fame, before the hits, before the tension, Eric Stewart was just a Manchester boy with a guitar and a dream. In the early 60s, he found his first taste of success with Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, the band behind the chart-topping song, The Game of Love. But after a few whirlwind years, Stewart wanted something deeper, music that meant something. That decision would change his life forever. By the early 70s, Stewart teamed up with three others, Gouldman, Kevin Godley, and Creme. Together, they formed 10cc, a band that didn't sound like anything else at the time. They weren't just musicians. They were inventors, engineers, storytellers. Stewart, in particular, was the technical mind behind their sound. His background as a studio engineer meant he wasn't afraid to experiment, to twist the limits of what pop music could be. Their first big hit, Donna, caught everyone off guard. It was quirky, romantic, and so different from the glam rock dominating the charts. Then came Rubber Bullets, Wall Street Shuffle, I'm Not in Love, songs that felt cinematic, almost like short films told through sound. Each one had Stewart's fingerprints all over it. The layered harmonies, the clever production, the clean yet emotional sound. But success came with its own shadow. While the band was celebrated for being musically fearless, those bold ideas sometimes clashed behind the scenes. Even then, small cracks were starting to show. Creative differences, unspoken frustrations, the kind that start quiet but grow louder with every song. And as the hits got bigger, those cracks became impossible to ignore. But that wasn't the whole story, because what happened next would push 10cc to its breaking point.
Success can be a strange thing. It brings glory, but it also brings pressure. And inside 10cc, that pressure was starting to twist everything. Eric Stewart and Gouldman had one vision: tight songwriting, smooth melodies, clever pop that connected with people. But Kevin Godley and Creme, they wanted to break boundaries, push the music into wild, experimental directions. That creative clash wasn't just artistic, it was personal. Every new song turned into a quiet tug-of-war. Behind the studio doors at Strawberry Studios, the band's creative home, sessions grew longer, arguments sharper. Stewart, known for his patience, found himself caught in the middle. He was trying to balance innovation with clarity, ambition with audience, but the others saw that balance as resistance. "You're holding us back," one of them reportedly said. To Eric, those words cut deeper than anyone knew. In 1976, the breaking point finally came. Godley and Creme decided to walk away, chasing their own project, a concept album so bizarre that record executives didn't even know how to sell it. Just like that, half the heart of 10cc was gone. Stewart and Gouldman were left to pick up the pieces. They were determined to prove that 10cc could survive, that the band was bigger than any two members. But behind that determination was something unspoken, a sense of loss, and a fracture that would never fully heal. But even after the split, Eric stayed silent for decades, and when he finally decided to speak, the truth he revealed painted a very different picture of what really tore 10cc apart.
For nearly half a century, Eric Stewart kept quiet. While fans debated, journalists speculated, and former bandmates gave their versions, Eric stayed away from the noise. He never attacked anyone publicly, never tried to defend himself. He just disappeared from the conversation. Many thought it was because he had made peace with the past. But as it turns out, silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Stewart later revealed that the constant conflict had left him emotionally drained. He wasn't bitter, he was just tired. In recent interviews, he spoke about how the joy of creating music had slowly turned into something darker, a battlefield of egos and misunderstandings. He described it as losing the fun in what once felt like magic. Coming from a man who engineered some of the most beautiful pop records ever made, that confession carried weight. What made this moment even more powerful was the timing. At 79, Stewart had nothing left to prove. He had built studios, produced records, collaborated with legends like Paul McCartney. He had lived the dream. Yet something inside him needed closure, needed to explain, at last, why he walked away from it all. When he finally opened up, fans expected anger or blame. But instead, Stewart spoke with grace and sadness. He said, "We just couldn't see eye to eye anymore. I still loved the guys, but the spark was gone." Those words hit differently. They weren't from a man seeking revenge. They were from someone finally making peace with the ghosts of his past. But what was it that really pushed him to that breaking point? The answer lies in the moment 10cc finally fell apart, a story filled with contracts, creative control, and one decision that changed everything. By the mid-70s, 10cc was unstoppable. I'm Not in Love had become a worldwide phenomenon, redefining what a pop ballad could sound like. The pressure to follow up that kind of success was enormous. And inside Strawberry Studios, that pressure began to twist every decision the band made. Stewart and Gouldman wanted to keep building on their success, focused, radio-friendly songs with emotional hooks and clever lyrics. But Godley and Creme were pushing for something far more experimental, something most record executives didn't even understand. They wanted to create concept pieces, sound collages, and even visual projects before music videos were common. At first, Stewart tried to bridge the gap. He believed they could combine both worlds, commercial appeal and innovation. But that balancing act came with a price. Long hours, creative disagreements, and the silent frustration that comes from feeling unheard. The final spark came during the production of their fourth album, How Dare You, in 1976. Tensions exploded during those sessions. Godley and Creme felt confined by the band's direction, and Stewart felt they were abandoning what made 10cc great. Eventually, the divide became impossible to repair. When Godley and Creme walked out, it wasn't just a lineup change, it was an emotional earthquake. Stewart later described the moment as a painful ending that nobody wanted to face. But despite the heartbreak, he and Gouldman pushed forward. They refused to let the name 10cc die. They signed new deals, hired session musicians, and released deceptive bends, proving they could still make hits. Songs like The Things We Do for Love climbed the charts, keeping the dream alive, at least on the surface. But deep down, Stewart knew it wasn't the same. The chemistry, the spark, the pure creative fire of the original four, it was gone. Still, that wasn't the end of Stewart's struggles. Because just when he thought things were finally back on track, life threw him a devastating curveball that would change everything.
What most fans never knew was that the real story of 10cc wasn't just about music. It was about friendship, loyalty, and personal heartbreak. Behind the fame and the perfect harmonies, Eric Stewart's life was quietly unraveling. After the split, Stewart tried to keep moving forward. He and Gouldman were still close, still writing, still performing. But the studio didn't feel the same. The laughter was gone. The spark of four friends pushing each other to be great had faded into memory. Then, in 1979, everything changed. Stewart was involved in a horrific car crash that nearly ended his life. He suffered severe facial injuries that required extensive surgery, and his recovery was long and painful. For months, he couldn't even bear to look in the mirror. It wasn't just his face that changed, it was his outlook on everything. During this time, Stewart said he began questioning what truly mattered. Fame didn't seem as important anymore. The endless studio sessions, the constant touring, all of it lost its shine. He said, "When you come that close to losing everything, you start hearing silence differently." Despite his struggles, Stewart eventually returned to music. He worked again with Gouldman, producing songs and albums that still carried that unmistakable 10cc polish. But even then, the emotional weight lingered. Some say he never fully recovered, not just from the crash, but from the fracture that tore 10cc apart. He also began focusing on personal relationships that had once been overshadowed by fame. Stewart married Gloria, who, interestingly, was the sister of one of his former bandmates' wives, showing that, despite everything, those old bonds never fully broke. And as the years went on, Stewart became known less for the rock star image and more for his quiet brilliance, a craftsman who let the music speak instead of headlines. But time has a way of stirring old memories, and when he finally decided to speak about the past, his words revealed a sense of both pride and regret. Because even now, decades later, Eric Stewart's reflections aren't about anger, they're about legacy. And that's what makes his silence and his voice so powerful.
Today, at 79, Eric Stewart isn't chasing fame or recognition. He's watching the world rediscover the very music that defined his life and realizing how far 10cc's legacy has traveled without him ever needing to say a word. Songs like "I'm Not in Love" and "The Things We Do for Love" are still played everywhere, in movies, television shows, even weddings. Decades later, those harmonies still sound flawless, still feel new. And for Stewart, that's the proof that the band's vision worked, that all the arguments, the tension, and the heartbreak were somehow worth it. In a recent conversation, he admitted that looking back, he finally understands why things fell apart. He said, "We were young, we were ambitious, and we were stubborn. Maybe too stubborn." It's a line that says everything, not with anger, but with clarity. Eric Stewart also spoke about how silence had become his peace. He didn't need to respond to every interview or documentary, because in his words, the songs already tell the story. I just had to live it. For a man who spent decades perfecting sound, it's poetic that his most powerful statement came in quiet honesty. Today, he rarely performs, choosing instead to live a life away from the spotlight, recording from home, enjoying family, and occasionally connecting with fans online. Yet every time someone mentions 10cc, you can still hear the pride in his voice. Not bitterness, not regret, just quiet pride. His story isn't about what was lost. It's about endurance, about a man who built something timeless, faced tragedy, and still found peace in his craft. And now, With his truth finally told, Eric Stewart stands not just as a founding member of 10cc, but as a reminder that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. But before we wrap up, one question still lingers, slight suspense. If 10cc had stayed together, would they have become one of the greatest bands of all time? Looking back now, the story of 10cc feels like a bittersweet symphony, a tale of genius, pride, and timing. Eric Stewart's voice, long silent, finally gives us the missing piece of that puzzle. It wasn't just about music or fame. It was about people, about friends who built something extraordinary only to watch it slip away under the weight of ambition. Stewart's honesty shows us that success can be beautiful, but fragile. Even the most gifted artists can lose each other chasing perfection. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away in silence. Today, Eric Stewart's words bring closure, not just for him, but for millions who grew up with his music. Because through every harmony, every lyric, every unforgettable melody, one truth remains clear. 10cc may have broken apart, but their sound will never fade. If you grew up with 10cc or if you've just discovered their music, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the band could have lasted longer if things had gone differently? Or was their short, shining run exactly what made them legendary? Share your thoughts below. And if you love stories that uncover the hidden chapters of classic music history, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk. Because here, we don't just remember the legends, we bring their stories back to life.